Hello, everybody. This is my first time speaking, not actually associated with President Obama, so this is a new thing for me. After 9 years with the President, I'm excited to have this opportunity, and thank you, Jeffrey, for inviting me to speak. The question that I am going to try to answer is where in the new administration does smart cities and shared mobility fit, right? How in the next 4 years should we be looking at this space and trying to figure out, is there going to be a continuation of the work that was done in the previous administration through US DOT, through the White House, through a number of different agencies in the smart city arena. I am going to try to do that in the there's two ways to answer that question, right? The first question is, from a federal government perspective, how is the federal government going to continue to play in the space? And then the other way to answer the question is, absent the federal government, is there enough energy here? Is there enough wind in the sails for there to be others who will carry this initiative forward? But I think the quick answer is that the federal government will probably continue to work in this space, maybe not in the same way that the previous administration did, but I think they will continue to work in the space. I think DOT, a lot of the programs and people, Go-Way is going to be speaking later from Department of Transportation Transit, Federal Transit Administration. There is definitely energy and funding given through Congress that will continue through the next 4 years. So there's funding from DOT, $60 million a year, that will go towards funding congestion mitigation using advanced technologies. And there is the MOD sandbox that Go-Way will talk about. But there is a continued energy within the Department of Transportation, I think, that will continue moving forward. From the federal side, there is also a continued interest in the Department of Energy. And there is a whole transportation section in the Department of Energy that is engaging with cities right now on shared mobility, and I think that energy will also continue. But to me, the more interesting answer to the question is the other folks who are going to fill this space, right? You looked at Susan's slides that she put up there, and almost every one of those initiatives are either city, community-based, or they are the private sector moving into the space. And that, to me, is where the exciting energy will be for the next 2 years. Kat, how do I move the slide forward? I apologize. I was looking for the symbol at the bottom.
Hang on 1 second, Mark.
All right.
There you go.
So, all right. So there we go. Now I got it. I will apologize for this. I am going the wrong way. We're going quickly through. How do I go backwards? All right, thank you. So when we look at the Smart City Challenge and what the Smart City Challenge was able to do in terms of trying to refocus many of the cities on these opportunities, right? When we talk about how do we use shared use, and how do we get cities to think about transportation in a different way, Smart City Challenge was able to affect the thinking and planning in 85 cities through 78 applications. And the Department of Transportation, in the way that we came up with the process, is to try to move the funding and the thinking into the way that local folks who are close to the problems use technology and innovation as a way to solve those problems. And that, to me, is where the energy for the next 4 years will probably reside. As these communities go through this new way of thinking, and as they engage other alternative funding sources to try to engage these problems, right? So using mobility as a solution to the problems that are out there. To me, that is where the energy is going to come in. When you look at the 7 finalists, San Francisco being one of the 7 finalists, you look at the way that they went through in Denver, and I'm borrowing these slides, by the way, from the Department of Transportation's website. If you go to transportation.gov and you look at smart cities, there is a whole presentation there that we, myself and others, worked very hard on to make sure that there was information about the 78 applications that are there for everyone to take a look at, and for the 7 applications, which were 75 pages each, which had significant detail and some incredibly innovative ways of dealing with this stuff, those 7 cities were able to come up with real ideas that will solve real problems in the city. And that, to me, is where the energy will shift from a potential lack of funding in the federal government. Because if you look at the federal government and where the funding is and where the discretionary funding is, and if we're going to increase military spending and we're going to give tax breaks and we're going to do all the things that the current administration wants to do, the discretionary funding all of a sudden shrinks significantly, and the capability to expand this area through additional discretionary funding probably won't happen. The infrastructure bill that is supposed to come probably won't be the way that is currently positioned. So the capability for these cities to move forward, they have to take a different approach. They have to go through this effort where they, if you look at each of these slides, there's the challenge, there's the goal, and the strategy. And if we had a best practice that came out of the Smart City Challenge, would be for cities to not only look to the 21st century for their solutions, but to look at their challenges first, right? Because all of us probably on the phone here or attending have great solutions or great ideas on how we can try to solve problems with the issues that we have. But if we don't look at the city first as to what the challenges and what the issues they're trying to solve, it's hard to define what the goal is. And then once you go through the process of hitting the challenge, hitting the goal, then you can start formulating strategy. And to me, the test case of these 7 cities and their capability of going through a public engagement, stakeholder engagement process, identifying their challenges, looking for the goal of how these mobility options will be solutions to these problems, and the strategies going through and how they were going to implement those issues. Columbus obviously won, right? So Columbus caught the bus, right? They now have an incredibly difficult job ahead of them in trying to find ways to address the challenges that they identified with the goals and the solutions. But that is a test case for all of us to keep an eye on, because they have $140 million worth of funding. They're going to do 20 different pilots. And if you look at what they're going to try to do and how they're going to try to do it, they organize themselves in 4 different districts, right? The residential district, commercial district, downtown district, and the logistics district. And in that area, they are trying to solve real problems. So in the residential district that I find a compelling argument, certainly we did at DOT in terms of providing Columbus with the win, was that the problem they're trying to solve is a infant mortality rate that's 4 times the national average, right? So 4 times the national average because that underserved community was unable to get through. So to me, that, I'm assuming, Prachi, I'm at my time?
Yeah, we'll have about 5 more minutes for questions, but
okay.
Yeah, please put your questions in. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sure.
So the residential piece and the underserved community and providing the opportunity for technology innovation as a means to solve that problem through a shared use approach, getting expecting mothers or new mothers to the doctor, to the service provider using a shared use, using data and is an innovative way to use technology to try to solve a very difficult problem and hopefully reduce the infant mortality rate. What comes next, and that's the part that I just want to finish up on. This is hard to read, but again, it's on DOT's website. What we were able to do before we left the administration is get funding out to for the cities that were finalists, and in addition to a number of other cities, to try to get them money for pieces of their application, that smart city application. Pittsburgh, San Francisco, Denver, and Portland all got money to try to implement some of the ideas that they had there. In addition, Galway will talk a little bit about the MOD sandbox and some of the work that's being done there. But the important point is that these cities, if they work independently or by themselves, I believe that they will not serve to accelerate through to get to the solutions that we talk about. What I do believe is a very important thing is for these cities to come together to share best practices, to start creating an environment, a data environment, environment for the private sector and the public sector to come together and form public-private partnerships very similar to what we did in the Smart City Challenge. So I'm very optimistic that in the coming next 4 years, that not only will we not see a slowdown in the process or the evolution of shared use mobility, but we'll actually see an acceleration through this process as cities come together, as they work together and communities come together to find different alternative funding sources. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. You gave us a very good understanding of what lays ahead. We have a few questions. The first one is by Brandon Yu, who asks, do you see partnerships between military installations and local communities as a good opportunity in this administration?
Look, I think that there is a significant amount of innovation being done in the military bases because they have to solve these problems, right? They have the logistics alone in trying to move people within those bases, and then the military applications alone. But there's the civilian application within the military bases of moving people to and fro, right? And it's a controlled environment, so the capability for AVs to be able to be tested and use cases established in a military base, I think, are significant. So to me, if the military continues to work through those test cases, much like we do on large commercial campuses or academic campuses, you have the ability to share some of that information, and some of that's already starting to happen. I think that my hope is that information will continue to flow to us on the outside of government so we can learn and take advantage of that information.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question, about 2 more minutes. And this is a question by Evgeny Klochkin. And the question is, how are the public and private roles distributed in terms of implementation? So not in funding, but in terms of implementation. And how do these public-private partnerships work in this context?
That's a great question. And I think if Aparna, I think, who works as the project manager for Columbus, would tell you that it is a difficult thing. It's not easy because it's a great thing to get $140 million, but when you have multiple funders and multiple folks who are at the table who all have a different idea of how this should be implemented, it can get complicated. And there is a requirement to both be agile and disciplined in how you go through your process engineering, right? So if you go through the process of picking your point in the future and then sticking to it to the point where you're not agile enough to adapt to these different companies, and as the technology progresses, you're going to probably fail. But at the other time, if you're not disciplined enough to keep a North Star to drive towards, you also will fail. So I think that Columbus will be an incredibly important test case of how you have the Columbus Partnership, which brings a significant amount of private sector money, and at the same time you have to keep that focus on those challenges or problems that you have that the city is trying to solve. If you lose those in an attempt to try to pursue the shiny object, I think you'll fail also.
Thank you for that good advice, Mark, and thank you for responding to the questions.